If you take your drawing from last week and you place a sheet of marker paper over top of it, you can still see through to the underneath. You may want to take a piece of tape and lock that into place before you start tracing things. And you may not want to just trace things. Maybe you want to do what I call a trace draw, so that if you have a line under there that's a little bit crooked or a little bit wonky or a little crazy, this chair out here seems to have one of those wide seats that I was talking about. Maybe I want to skinny that up when I go in to redraw it. So I'm going to take a micron pen and I'm going to draw my room. This line here is leaning a little bit, so I'm going to make it more straight up and down this time as I go in to draw it. Maybe if I have a very square top in the underdrawing, I want to make a rounder top in this drawing. So I'm going to go here, here, and here, and I'm going to round it out. I can put guidelines and sketch lines and vanishing lines and all that kind of stuff into this drawing if I need them, because they're all going to get eaten up by light and shadow eventually. But for instance, this chair right here, I think is too wide. I'm going to narrow it up. Feels better than the chair I had before. Maybe I make a mistake and I make these legs really straight up and down. Then I change my mind and I want to go a little bit out from there. So I'm going to get my perspective thinking back into here, and I'm going to understand where that's going to be, and I'm going to come back on this axis a little bit and get this line drawn in like so. Got a whole lot of lines going on there. I'm not really sure what's happening with that. So maybe I should draw a cabinet over here instead of a sofa probably. But let me just quickly get some furniture to draw into this room so that we can do a demonstration of light and shadow. You guys already have the concepts of light and shadow. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to make it narrower down there. So I made a mistake. I'm going to make it better. I'm going to show you how to correct for that. Because a big part of being good at something is knowing how to recover from a mistake. I don't know what this is. It's just part of an example, but I'm going to put it out here so I can shade it. Let's imagine that there's a light in this room. And since I have a window drawn here, I'm going to say the light's coming from the right-hand side and above. So I'm going to do a 45-degree angle from up above. So I want to start mapping out where my light is going to hit the floor. I'm going to have my light coming across this way. So I want to light this couch from this end, and every plane that faces this way is going to be dark, and every plane that faces up. So let's imagine the box that this couch was drawn into. If the light's coming across this way, the planes that face up are going to be light, right? The planes that face out this way are going to be in shadow. These end planes, I'm going to get to decide. I think I'm going to shade those two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my markers. I'm going to use my 30, 50, 70% thinking. You remember that? 30 is step 1. Divide light from shadow. I put my 30 below the line. I should have made it there. 10, 30. I have 0 and 10 up in the light. I have 30, 50, 70 for shadow. 10%, remember, is my light. 0 is my highlight. So I know that everything in the shadow is going to be at least 30%. So I take my 30% marker and I'm going to shade this end and the front of this sofa. I think first I need to put a piece of plastic underneath. I probably need to move that sheet of paper so I just have a clean sheet here. But everything that's facing forward, I'm going to go 30%. This back of the sofa, I'm going to think of as a cylinder. So if I had a cylinder laying here, and the light was coming across it, then at some point that would move from light to shadow, and this would be in shadow here, and would cast a shadow on the floor, right? So I'm going to decide where that line is going to be, and I'm going to make a line with my marker, because the part that's facing up, I want to have light. So I'm going to shade the back of the sofa in. Now, if my tendency is to scribble, then I'm going to make sure my marker is moving towards the vanishing point or at this back angle with the tilt of the back of the sofa, right? Up and down or back and forth, but I'm going to think about that plane before I start scribbling that shadow in. This cylinder here, this arm, I'm going to leave the top of it light and I'm going to shade this end of it. So I'm going to decide where that shadow is going to come in, and I'm going to shade it just like this, and I'm going to shade this end of the sofa. I'm going to shade this end here. I also have this arm over here that's acting just like that cylinder, right? So I'm going to shade that. So now all the angles that are facing out to the room and all the angles that are facing out to the end here are shaded in 30%. We know that the 30% is not our darkest dark. In fact, it's our lightest shadow. That's our reflected light. So my next step is to divide my shadow. What's the name of the next one? Core, right? So get your 50. Maybe I'm going to use the point this time because this cylinder back here is really small. So I'm going to take and I'm going to draw right along the edge of that, 50%, where this cylinder turns from light to shadow. And this cylinder turns from light to shadow, so I'm going to have 50% along there. This is like a cube, so this is going to turn to shadow here and here. Along the edge of light and shadow, I'm making a hard line that says, this is where my shadow core is, and it's going to turn. Now I have a choice to make here. To define the edge of this, I think I'm actually going to bring this line up in 50% just to show the turn of the sofa there. I also want to take, well, I'll do this in a minute with cast shadow, right? My next is cast, and I want to go 70% with that. Take your 70, and I'm going to use the pointed marker again to make sure that I'm just defining the areas I'm going to go. I'm going to say, underneath the sofa, there's going to be a darkness. It's going to cast a shadow on the floor. It might also cast a shadow on the wall, so it might be useful to me to figure out where this line's coming out from there, right? I didn't draw that in before, but I want it now. So I'm going to cast a shadow here to pop that sofa up off the wall and pop it up here off the floor. Then I'm going to go back to my 50 because I like to blend that shadow out. And I'm just going to go down here to the bottom of the sofa and here to the bottom of the sofa. And here I'm going to find my way back in here to the floor and then back to the wall there. Already, I've got a pretty good shading on that sofa. If I don't have a lot of time, I don't need to go into it more than that. If I wanted to project that a shadow would cast this direction out onto the floor in front of it, then I would probably take my 30% to experiment with that before I did it really hard. And I'd say, well, it's going to cast a shadow out in this direction, right? So let's take this edge, this straight line here, and say that's going to make a straight line out along the floor here. And this, if it's coming from this direction, I've kind of moved my light over, not just this way, but also coming this way from like the back of the room kind of to shade the end of this. So maybe I want to come out here a little bit with that into the room and say I've got some shadow in front of the sofa there. I'm going to go back to my 70 now, and I'm going to, actually I want to go even darker. I think I'm going to go to my 90. Because I want this to read from across the room. So I'm going to go with a really dark marker. I'm going to put some lines in here that define it. So I know that's going to be right underneath the sofa right here and right here. Probably going to be my darkest darks. Back here, I'm going to pop that baby up. I want it to really read. And go back to my 70 now. And I'm maybe going to draw a line within the shadows that's going to help define these sofa cushions. Put a little bit of a something in here that makes it look like there's some definition there, right? I can come here and say if this is casting a shadow across here, it's going to actually cast a shadow onto the seat. And maybe this is going to cast a shadow under here. Now I've got some really dark lines in there. I'm going to go back to my 50. I'm going to soften them up a little bit and blend them into the rest of the drawing. This right here, I notice, I want to draw a dot to dot. I want to have a line coming from this point here to this point here. Some people like to outline their shadows. I like the softer nature of not doing that, but if you needed to at the beginning, you could take a sofa like this or a chair like this or a board like this, and you could say, all right, I'm gonna have the shadow come this way into the room. And I'm actually gonna draw it on the sofa. So if I had a line right here and a line right here to define where these were gonna move from light into shadow, that wouldn't hurt my drawing because this black line here is actually the line between light and shadow. It just might look a little bit like this cylinder there. I also kind of want to push myself into going into the darks, all right? I want to get up to my 90 at some point so that I have some high contrast in a drawing and that it's going to read well in a presentation. This is my 50. I'm taking my 50 and I'm going up against those 90s that I made, kind of pulling them out a bit, getting them blended in. I noticed that my shadow core isn't really working very well. I'm gonna go over that, sort of redefine it along these edges. Now that I'm in high contrast. It's gonna make it look much rounder in there if I have reflected light down in there. So I'm just doing a little blending and a little touch up and that kind of thing as I go in at the end and figure out what I want to do in terms of that sofa. Okay. What other kind of objects do we have that we want to look at? Sorry about that. I'm trying to control the sound in here as well. You want to go after this sofa? What if the sofa was lit from this side? We'd still want to have a pretty dark shadow behind it. Let's go with the big guns this time. Let's take my 90, draw underneath here where it's going to cast a shadow, and back here where I know it's going to go back to the wall. Let's take my 70 and go next to that. How much time do I save by working from the dark to the light? $50. Maybe I want to take my 50 now into my shadow core up here. I'm defining the end here where I know it's going to go from the light to the dark. I'm going to leave the end of this light. I'm going to leave the upper side light. So I've got two surfaces that are light where I only had one over here. So I'm going to take my 30 and I'm going to shade in the end of this sofa here. I did a 50 where this leg turned away from the light down there, so I probably want to come back to my 70 or my 90. Kind of define that. So I'm just going to make a line down there that shows, maybe fade that out just a little bit, just a touch. If it looks too ragged, I certainly can take my 50 and blend it back in. Over here, I need some 50. So I have to decide which of these wonky lines, right? I've got a whole bunch of scribble over here. I made some mistakes. All you need to do is take your 50% and define the line that you want me to grade you on, the line that you want us to see. And I'll see you made a new decision about it, and I'll know which of those lines you meant. Back to my 30 to shade this side of this. And I probably need to go 70 to cast a shadow of that arm onto the seat. A little bit of a line here, where that would put some darkness. Now, this is jumping up here from that. It looks kind of weird. I probably should take my 10% and decide which one of these surfaces are going to receive the most light. I have two choices. Is the light coming from this window, so it's going to be the front surface, or is the light coming from above, so it's going to be the top surface? It's up to you. I kind of like the idea of the light coming from the window, so I'm going to let it be the front surface. I'm going to take my 10%. I'm going to shade the top of the seat. I'm going to shade the top of this where it might curve away from the light up here. The tops of these arms should also be shaded because I said everything facing up. Now I look at my drawing, I want to unify it because this looks so dark and this is so light. I think I'm going to take my 70 over here in the shadow. And I'm actually going to make my shadow core here 70. I'm going to go to 50. Notice I'm still moving horizontally and vertically because this is the end of the sofa that goes horizontally and vertically. That feels better already. That means I probably want to punch this down and actually go up to 100 underneath that sofa. And then back to my 90. I'm going to jump over the 90 right now, and I'm just going to go with the 70 because I know that that will blend if I pull it this direction to get me something that feels kind of like a 90 in between there. 50 is going to even those out all nicely. I don't have to be too anal retentive about blending if I've kept my contour idea, right? So if I'm moving across the floor here, I'm headed towards my vanishing point, or I'm moving flat because everything on the floor moves flat horizontally or off towards vanishing point. A symbol for windows or glass is this little 3 stripes like that. So you can go into here and put some stripes like so. You may want to go in there with like a 10% and see what happens if you streak that window up with a little bit of 10%. Just chip your marker into the top of the window and pull it down, or the bottom of the window and pull it up in a few spots. You can barely see it. So I think I want to go to 30. I also have here a windowsill I'm going to see, right? So this facing up should be paper white right here. This should be really light. And then the window, as it comes into the room, should be a little darker. So I'm going to take my 30 and I'm going to go here. I'm going to streak it down towards the sofa just a little bit once in a while. And maybe right along the edge of that to make it feel like I've got the back of a room going on there or the edge of something. I do a long, a medium, and a short. Maybe I go all the way back to the corner because this wall would catch more light, right? Maybe right at the edge of this arm, I want to pull it up. Maybe I want to join it, or maybe I just want to do that long, medium, short thing again, right? It feels pretty good. This chair, I'm going to see light going underneath it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to project that 45-degree angle down this way to the floor, and instead of having this be the shadow, if the light's coming from over here, I'm going to actually move the shadow this way and let this be my shadow. I'm going to jump over the 30%. I'm going to be brave this time. I'm going to say that's going to cast a shadow right here on the floor. I'm moving my marker in a horizontal, and then I'm moving it towards vanishing point because the shadow is going to go towards vanishing point as well as the other things in the drawing. Notice how this line, the front of the shadow, is headed towards vanishing point. This shadow is vertical. This shadow is horizontal. Keep your shadows in line with your perspective. This line from the back of the leg, I'm going to bring up to join the shadow. And this leg from the back of the leg, I'm going to bring up to join the shadow. So I've got that kind of thing going on. If I want to shade these legs, I'm going to think of them as cylinders. I'm going to take a shadow, I'm going to draw on this left side of the cylinder. Notice I'm shading the one that I want you to see and not the one that I don't want you to see. I might need to go back into that with my pen a little bit and say, all right, this is going to have some thickness to it. I didn't get that done correctly. So let's go in here and say, this is going to be my tube here with the smile at the bottom, and I'm going to sort of line things up. Sometimes I actually do my shadows first and my inking later. But I moved this line over, and this line that was so narrow now became the end, or became the line between light and shadow instead of becoming the edge of my chair leg. And I like that better. I think that I'm using my 50 now. I'm going to shade this end of the chair because the light's coming from that direction. Should I shade the front of the chair or not? Well, I made this mistake here, so I think I'm going to shade this front edge here as well. That's going to get me shading the inside of this thing, and then the outside, like a ribbon, right, comes over here. So now I'm going to go back in and say, this is the front of my seat, is always going to be light. And this side of my seat that goes off this way is going to move into shadow right here. So I've got all that wonky, crazy, linear stuff going on. It's probably time for me to really be specific in there. Get that ironed out so it's not so wonky and it's not so ugly and it's not so crazy. These kind of lines that go in here, this is where it's good to bring in some contour. So let's say I bring this in and I go long, medium, and short in there. And then I go long, medium, and short here. See how I'm creating some texture on the edge of that chair and I'm making it look like it's just eating up those lines right there, right? These actually could come around and around this way. Maybe more in the shadow area is a good idea. To make this look like it's a little rounder. I'm going to take my 90 and I'm actually going to wail on this because I want people to see the edge I chose. Maybe not all the way. Maybe I'm just going to put it down and put a stroke and a stroke and a stroke and a stroke. You'll get the sense for when to do that more as time goes on. But that's a line quality issue, right? Where you're not going all the way from one end to the other of a thing, but you're grabbing this end, you're pushing towards that end and this end and pushing towards this end, and you'll get a thicker line in certain spots and a thinner line in certain spots. And it'll sort of help you to get things going the way you want them to, but you'll also have a variation of line quality.